Now let me tell you a story. This ain't no ordinary story. This isn't your everyday press conference moment. This is a truth bomb that shook the hall, slapped arrogance right across the face, and told the world India isn't playing second fiddle to anyone anymore. Imagine this. An international stage, cameras flashing, suits lined up, the West sitting tall like they own the ground. And then there she is, a young, confident American girl armed with facts downloaded from biased search engines, sipping on the narrative she grew up with. She stood tall, chin lifted, thinking she was about to trap Dr. S. Jaishankar, India's external affairs minister, like she was going to catch him slipping. She thought she had it in the bag, but she forgot one thing. Jaishankar is built different. Now, don't get me wrong, she wasn't rude. She was polite, articulate, even sharp. But the question? Oh, the question. It was loaded. It carried the same tone the West has used for decades. That tone of, we know better than you. That tone of, how dare you not follow our values. That same tone of, why aren't you walking in line with the West? She said something along the lines of, why is India buying oil from Russia when the West is imposing sanctions? Isn't that against global ethics? The room froze. People leaned forward in their seats. Some smirked, expecting India to fumble. Some reporters already had their headlines drafted. They were ready to twist his words, ready to brand India selfish, ready to accuse India of betraying so-called universal principles. But that's when it happened. The man didn't flinch, not even a blink. Dr. Jaishankar leaned into the mic, calm as a monk, sharp as a blade, and what came out wasn't just a reply, it was a surgical strike of truth. He said, you do what's in your interest, we do what's in ours, and trust me, we know how to take care of our people. Boom. That wasn't a mic drop, that was an empire drop. He flipped that question on its head so fast, the very air shifted. You could feel it, like thunder rolling under silk, because in that moment, he wasn't just answering her, he was speaking to a whole system, a system that pretends to be neutral but always picks sides. A system that preaches democracy while selling weapons. A system that punishes others for the very same acts it does every day. And in that instant, India spoke loud and clear. See, what the West forgets is that India isn't the same India from 1991. This isn't the nation that went begging to the IMF. This isn't the India that sat quiet at meetings, nodding while the West moved its chess pieces. This is an India that built itself brick by brick, bite by bite, and bullet by bullet. You want to talk ethics? Let's talk about nations that built their empires on colonization, now lecturing others about human rights. Let's talk about countries that bomb others into rubble and then claim moral high ground. Let's talk about media that spins every time India stands proud as defiance instead of independence. But Jaishankar wasn't here for that. Not today, not ever, because that's his style. He doesn't argue, he doesn't shout, he doesn't need to prove India's worth to anyone. He just drops facts, cold, clean, undeniable. And when the world tries to throw shade, he lights the room up with truth. He said, if Europe is buying gas from Russia, why is it only a problem when India does it? You could hear spines stiffen. That was the moment the script flipped. That was when the narrative rewrote itself. Because he wasn't just exposing hypocrisy, he was doing it with grace, clarity, and the kind of confidence that comes only from knowing exactly who you are. India has spent decades listening to lectures on freedom from nations that topple elected governments, lectures on peace from countries with trillion-dollar defense budgets, lectures on the economy from places drowning in debt and printing dollars like play money. But now it's India's turn to speak. And that moment when Jaishankar calmly told that young woman the truth, he wasn't tearing her down, he was freeing her. He gave her a front row seat to the rise of a new world, a world not east or west, not colonial or subservient, a world where India sets its own course. That room didn't clap, it sat stunned, because they'd never seen India this tall before. And this wasn't even his first time. Oh no, this man has been on a roll, whether reminding the UK about overdue colonial reparations, telling the US that India doesn't need anyone's approval to guard its borders, or telling Canada to fix its extremists before pointing fingers. He's been serving truth on a silver platter. And the world is finally starting to get the message. India is done playing nice. Don't mistake that, though. Politeness is still India's way. Respect runs deep in its culture. But there comes a point when silence looks like weakness. That's when you need a voice like Jaishankar, someone not just diplomatic but deadly precise with his words. Someone who reads the chessboard better than anyone and moves like a grandmaster. Someone who doesn't wait for permission to protect his people. The West has always tried to rule through media, money, and power. And sure, they had their time. But times have shifted. India's building satellites, AI, fighter jets. India's making trade deals that don't rely on the dollar. India's standing toe-to-toe with China, face-to-face with the West, saying, "We'll be friends, but we won't be puppets." That young American girl, she walked in thinking she had the advantage. She left with a lesson, not from books, but from a living example of Indian diplomacy. And the beauty of it was that Jaishankar didn't boast. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't make it personal, because truth doesn't need decorations. Truth stands tall on its own, and the world isn't ready for a confident India. An India that doesn't seek validation. An India that doesn't break under pressure, but builds under it. An India that holds ancient wisdom and wears modern armor. Think about it. When the world had vaccines, they hoarded them. When India had vaccines, it shipped them to 150 plus nations. When the world faced war, they sold arms. When India faced war, it defended, not destroyed. When others spread propaganda, India spread progress. That's why when Jaishankar speaks, the world listens, not because he shouts, but because his words cut clear. The irony is they keep underestimating him. They think he's just another foreign minister, but he's a mirror. And every time he answers, he forces the world to see itself, and it doesn't always like what it sees. That's power. That's real diplomacy. That's India's new voice. This isn't the old era of staying non-aligned just to be safe. This is the era of being multi-aligned, aligned with your own vision, your own growth, your own people. So when the next person stands up and asks India, "Why are you doing this?" they better brace themselves, because India's done apologizing for surviving, done explaining for succeeding, done defending for rising. That moment with the American girl wasn't about a clapback. It was about claiming ground, about sending a message, not with anger, but with awareness, not with aggression, but with assertion. And if you're wondering what lesson to take, it's simple. Don't ever let someone else write your story. Don't let others define your ethics. Don't let someone sit across from you, question your choices, and make you forget the battles you already fought just to stand tall. Because there will always be people who dislike your confidence, who hate that you think differently, who want you to walk their path while ignoring your own. But just like Jaishankar, when the spotlight turns on you, don't blink, don't step back, stand firm, breathe deep, and let truth speak louder than fear, because the world doesn't respect the loudest voice, it respects the clearest one. And right now that voice is speaking Hindi, Tamil, Bengali, Telugu, Marathi, and English, all wrapped into one flag. That voice is rising from Delhi, from Bengaluru, from Chennai, from Kashmir, from the Northeast, from every corner once ignored. That voice is declaring to the world that India has arrived, and not quietly, not secretly, but proudly, powerfully, and permanently. One calm reply reminded the world that India answers only to its people, not foreign expectations. And that line was rooted not just in a moment of sharp diplomacy, but in decades of change, resilience, and growing pride. For too long, the global stories tried to shape India's image, whether through patronizing advice dressed up as policy or through subtle pressure under the name of global responsibility. The West often treated India as if it were a pupil being tested, not a sovereign nation making its own choices. But the world has moved. India has moved. And when the minister spoke that calm yet piercing reply, it was more than just an answer. It was a declaration of freedom from the old model of Western approval. There's a long history behind that moment, from the times of colonial rule where every decision was dictated by foreign rulers to the early independence era of cautious steps. India spent decades trying to balance itself in a world shaped by narratives it did not write. The world told India when to speak, how to speak, and even what not to say. It was expected to remain polite, deferential, and always aligned with what the so-called developed nations found acceptable. Even when India acted for its own good, it had to explain, justify, or defend those moves to powers whose own records were full of double standards. But something shifted, and that shift was not only economic, military, or technological. It was also psychological, it was cultural, it was emotional. 1 billion people slowly began to believe that India no longer needed instructions on how to behave, that it had the wisdom, the vision, and the right to carve its own way. This new confidence gradually started to show in its leaders, especially on global stages. India was no longer entering rooms hoping for a seat at the table. It was entering knowing that without its presence, the table was incomplete. And that is why when an American student asked Jaishankar a seemingly innocent but deeply loaded question that carried the old condescending tone, the reply was not angry, not loud, but calm, measured, and cutting, because the goal was never to insult her. The goal was to correct the mindset she unknowingly represented. It was a moment not of scolding, but of teaching, not just to her, but to a generation raised on Western exceptionalism. What Jaishankar did with that reply was dismantle the idea that India owes anyone an explanation for decisions made for its people. He reminded both the room and the wider audience that every Indian decision, whether about trade, diplomacy, defense, or energy, is tested by one question. Does this help the Indian people? That is the new principle. Not whether it pleases foreign observers, not whether it gains approval in think tanks in Washington or Brussels, but whether it uplifts the farmer, empowers the woman, protects the border, and strengthens the economy. That shift is revolutionary because for decades, India was seen as a country that needed help, guidance, or constant approval. But today, India is sharing digital models with the world. It is exporting vaccines, not waiting for them. It is building aircraft carriers, launching missions to planets, and setting global standards in fintech. So when foreign voices question India's policies, assuming they must fit into the West's agenda, it's not just misguided, it's outdated. Jaishankar's reply summed up that change. It wasn't defensive. He did not explain away India's choices like a student being grilled. He stated clearly that India will always act in the interest of its own people. Whether it is buying oil from Russia to keep fuel affordable, refusing to take sides in conflicts that don't serve national interest, or speaking out against Western double standards, every decision rests on one core principle: sovereignty with responsibility to its own citizens, not to foreign powers. That is what unsettles the traditional order. Because when a country like India speaks with such certainty, it shakes the entire post-colonial balance of power. The West is not used to being challenged by a country it once tried to shape. They are not used to being told politely but firmly, "You don't get to decide our values." They are not used to seeing a rising nation that doesn't beg for alliances but builds partnerships on equal ground. And it unsettles them not because India is hostile, but because India is independent. The calm nature of Jaishankar's words is what made them powerful. He didn't use fiery language. He didn't shout. He used composure as his weapon, precision as his strength. And in doing so, He showed a kind of power that doesn't depend on volume, but on vision. A vision where India does not need to explain itself, because its actions speak louder than the assumptions others make. And let's be clear, India is not rejecting the world. It is engaging with it, but on its own terms. It is choosing multi-alignment instead of blind loyalty. It is trading with the US, buying from Russia, investing in Africa, and working with the Indo-Pacific all at once. That flexibility, that confidence to say yes or no based on its own reasoning and not on borrowed ideas is what defines the new India. Jaishankar's reply also revealed a deeper flaw in the global mindset. The belief that Western choices are always moral and anything different is suspicious. But India has learned through history that morality is often used as a mask for power. Nations that speak of freedom have armed dictators. Nations that claim to protect peace have fueled endless wars. India's sense of morality is not for display. It is rooted in its civilizational spirit. It believes in the idea that the world is one family, but it also knows that care begins at home. You do not sacrifice your citizens just to earn applause abroad. So when that young woman asked her question, she probably didn't expect a lesson in geopolitical dignity, but that's what she received. Because in that moment, India's external affairs minister stood not just as a leader, but as the voice of a billion people tired of being looked down on. A billion people saying through him, we know what we are doing and we are doing it for ourselves. That is a message the world must accept, because today's India will not be judged by foreign press, swayed by online outrage, or bent by diplomatic pressure. It is guided by its own needs, its own priorities. Whether it is facing China at the border, developing its own defense systems, or refusing to be dragged into rivalries of great powers, India's compass now points in one direction: national interest guided by responsibility at home. Yes, this may unsettle some because the West is used to allies that obey. But India does not obey anymore. It engages in dialogue. It makes decisions. It stands with dignity. That was the real meaning of that brief exchange. And it was not just about foreign policy. It reflected something far deeper, an Indian civilizational confidence. A confidence that comes from knowing you do not need anyone's stamp of approval to live with pride. A confidence that understands the world is not a classroom with teachers and students. We are equals. And India, with its culture, intellect, and rising strength, is stepping forward to lead, not to follow. That is why the minister's composed words traveled far beyond that room. They moved through headlines, sparked online debates, and more importantly, touched the hearts of Indians everywhere who for years have seen their nation underestimated. It was a moment of validation, not from outside but from within, a reminder that leadership is not always about noise. It is about clarity. Because when you answer to your people, you do not shake under global pressure. You do not collapse under criticism. You do not give away your sovereignty. You meet the world's gaze and say, we see you, but we also see ourselves.